Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Tennis and Bagels podcast. This is your host, Vansh, and today joining us we have Steve Flink, a returning guest, a Hall of Famer, historian. We do these post-major chats every time, and Steve, this was one of the best majors that I've seen on the men's and women's side collectively in a long time. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. You got those finals that everybody would have wanted at the start. The top two seeds from both divisions. You got closely contested finals in each case, one incredibly close and the other hard fought to the end. We couldn't have asked for more, because I also remember, Vanch, being one year, and this would have been 92. The tournament director was Patrice Clerc, and in Paris. And I went and interviewed him the morning of the men's final, which was Jim Courier was about to dismantle Peter Cordes, Sebastian's father, in the final. But the women had a gem the day before, with Monica Seles beating Steffi Graf in one of the epic women's finals ever, 10-8 in the third. And he said something really interesting, which is that he felt, as someone running the tournament, it's important to have good matches all the way through, but that there was nothing more important, because it would linger the longest with the fans, than to have a great final. And of course, he didn't get it with the men that year, but the women stole the show with Seles and Graf. And here you had a memorable women's final and then an unforgettable men's final. So I think I agree with him. I think no matter what's happened over the course of the fortnight, you want it to end on the highest possible note, with both finalists close to peak form and a suspenseful, hard-fought, well-played match. We certainly got that in both cases. Women not as well played, but that had a lot to do with the conditions as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was also the first time since 1984 at the tournament that, world number 1 and 2 played each other in both women's and men's singles. So I thought
that was remarkable. And of course, it was a reminder that John McEnroe, as you know, was doing commentary for TNT. It was not a reminder that he wanted, because of course that was the most devastatingly potent loss of his career, when he led Lendl 2-0 and lost in 5 sets, his best chance ever to win the French, to add it to his collection. And then that same year, interestingly, Vanch, Martina Navratilova beat Chrissy Evert 3-1 in the final, which is astonishing when you look back that she could do that on clay. The next 2 years, Chrissy beat her in the finals in 3-set matches, both of them really well played. And I think it was the best Martina Navratilova, might have been the best match she's ever played anywhere, you could argue, but certainly the best match she ever played on clay. So that was a memorable year because of the fact that Lendl made his breakthrough. It was his 5th major final, but the focus was so much more on McEnroe coming agonizingly close but not winning it. And I felt in a way which was fair enough. That was one angle and one perspective. But to me, Lendl, who had labored through so many tough losses in finals and majors, a couple to Connors. He'd lost his first one back in 81 to Borg, and it was Bjorn winning the French, and then he had lost a couple of U.S. Open finals to Connors, one Australian final to Wielander, and now he finally wins in dramatic fashion from 2 sets down against McEnroe, and almost all the talk is about McEnroe squandering his opportunity rather than Lendl making a splendid breakthrough. So be it. That's what I remember about it. I also remember so well sitting there with Curry Kirkpatrick of Sports Illustrated as we watched McEnroe's final forehand volley go wide on match point. It looked like a volley he was going to make rather easily, and he didn't. And that was the match. And Lendl's utter joy and relief simultaneously as he saw that ball go out. So it was a great year.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, coming into this tournament, the storylines were all about the new two, as Jim Courier talks about it on TNT. I thought that was a cool way of phrasing it, because they have won, the last 6 majors combined. They do feel better than much ahead of the rest of the field in terms of their, level. And, coming into this final, I think it was very close, like between them. It wasn't, we'd just seen the Rome final between them. But in, it was very much a 50-50 contest, given how efficient Sinner was throughout the whole tournament and how much more improved he looked, given that Rome was his first tournament back. And, it was that suspenseful all the way through that, there's a legitimate conversation going on. Like, is it one of the top 5 greatest men's matches of all time in terms of, quality and drama, suspense, all the rest.
Yeah. Well, as you know, I wrote a book called The Greatest Matches of All Time. But my book came out in 2012. And actually the last match that went in at the last minute, was because it happened right near time of publication, was Djokovic's 5-hour, 53-minute win over Nadal in the final of that 2012 Australian. And obviously, there's been a lot of great matches since, but I was thinking about it last night. It would be in my top 5. For the Open era. I would say let's looking at it from that standpoint, because that would leave out some of the great matches of 20s, 30s, 40s, etc. Then you're getting into the Tildens and the Budges and the Jack Kramers and Pancho Gonzalez and going way back. And then if it were that list, I wouldn't necessarily have this in the top 5. I'd have it high. I'd certainly probably have it in the top 10. But for Open era, which is 68 till now, so we're looking at 57 years. I thought the reason I say that, Vansh, is, in my view, and I don't know how you feel about it, when I did the book, my position was, ideally, it would have to be 2 great players contesting the greatest matches, and that it would be at a major, and that preferably it would be in a major final. And so this one obviously met all that criteria. And then you want the quality to be there, not just the closeness, but the standard. And we had that here. I feel like you could talk about the early stages. Was Carlos sharp for a set and a half? No. Sinner was very good from a breakdown in the first set at 3-2 to go up 5-2 in the second. That stretch there, winning 9 out of 12 games, was very impressive. And he was sort of controlling the tempo. And after losing that one service game in the 5th game, he didn't come close to getting broken again, really, until he served for the second set. So was Carlos quite up to par in that part of the match? No, but he wasn't awful. He just was outplayed. And then from there, I think the match was incredibly high quality the rest of the way, because Alcaraz took advantage of a slightly apprehensive Sinner, broke him to get back on serve in that second set. Sinner couldn't serve it out at 5-3. And then they go to the tiebreaker. And that was sort of a reprieve for Sinner, I thought, because he hadn't been able to serve it out. But then at 5-6, he got himself into the breaker. And he held one more time to make the breaker. And from 1-2, I thought Sinner played really well. Some mistakes from Carlos, including a 5-2 down. He tried to hit a drop shot sort of falling backwards and missed it. He made some bad choices, but Sinner also played some great tennis. Got to 6-2 and eventually won at 7 points to 4. And I felt at that stage, it was hard for me to see him losing from 2 sets up, even as ferocious a competitor as Carlos is. I thought it was going to be an awfully tough, long road back, which it was. But I thought Sinner would relax. And actually, at the start of the 3rd set, Vansh, he did. Remember, he got that break for 1-love. And then he has a game point for 2-love, and he missed a pretty routine forehand cross court. I think he saw the opening to either hit the winner or certainly set the point up for the next shot. But it was an aggressive shot cross court. He didn't hit it crazy hard, but he missed wide. And I thought that was a big miss. And the look on his face when he got broken a few points later, there was a close-up of him, and he looked like he almost was saying to himself, why did you let that happen? You're 2 sets to love, you're a breakup. This is the time you got to consolidate it. And then the next thing you knew, Carlos was at 4-1. And Sinner let his next service game get away from 40-15. I felt those were costly. I don't want to say lapses. Costly games, though, because you kind of like his chances from 40-30 or 40-15. And that's where these guys are so good, closing out. There's closing out service games that are within their grasp. And he didn't do that in either case. And yet, despite that, Vansh.
Yeah, at 40-15, he hit a really good first serve, right? It was like 127 miles per hour down the tee. And then, Carlos gets that lob back pretty deep, and Sinner lets it bounce and then goes for the overhead, if I recall.
Right. You're talking, yeah, exactly.
But the net.
But the first one was just his own fault. The first one was, on the 1-love game was just an error he shouldn't make. And it's true. Carlos did well to get that. And that was pretty much right around the average first serve speed for Sinner. He was serving really well. And first ball, great return from Carlos. But still, I'm saying the likelihood is he wouldn't have gotten broken both times. He at least would have stayed on serve. But he's down a break, and then surprisingly, Carlos doesn't serve out that set. That's what made this match so fascinating. And obviously, they're two great returners, so I don't want to make it sound like they just gave their service games away. They didn't, and they both put a lot of pressure on each other. They were getting a very high percentage of first serve returns back in play, which impressed me. At one stage, it was in about 84% for one and 92%. It was amazing how many. I was surprised how many of those first serves were coming back, and then they both were putting a lot of pressure on each other with second serve returns. So I do want to put that in perspective. But then Sinner now has the chance at 4-5 to serve his way to 5-all and perhaps get to another tiebreaker and maybe save himself some anguish with a chance to close it out. But then, he made an error on the first point, got a little bad luck on the second point with a net cord that made his approach sit up, and then Carlos breaks him. And so that set, rather than going to 5-all, was suddenly in the Alcaraz column. And but I thought the most compelling stretch of the match was Sinner serving at 2-3 in the fourth. And he goes all the way to 5-3, and then love 40 on Alcaraz. He's won 15 out of 16 points. He's just sailing. And I thought he played a really good game up to love 40 on Carlos's serve. And you had to believe, I'm sure he in the back of his mind felt it too. And they didn't think it was in the bag, but he thought, okay, this is not just add out. This is triple match point. And the first match point, I want to get your feeling. Let me describe it, and then you tell me if you agree, Vansh. But the first match point, I felt was Carlos forced him. Carlos hit a very deep forehand. He sort of pulled him off the court a bit with his cross-court forehand. It was not an easy shot. Sinner did not miss going down the line by much. He played a safe margin inside the court and didn't go near the sideline, but he missed it long.
Yeah, and that was a forced error for sure.
Yeah, that was a forced error, and you can't blame him. If he'd gotten that ball back, it would have been impressive on his part. So you can't really criticize him for that. The second one I do, because Carlos missed the first serve by a country mile, and which told me that maybe he was a bit nervous. He hit a decent second serve kicker, which Sinner took on the backhand, trying to go inside in back to Carlos's backhand. And it didn't look to me like I would have loved to have seen an MPH on that to know how hard he hit it. Didn't look to me like he hit it that hard, but he missed it well long. And I began to think, oh boy, that to me looked like a slightly nervous miss. So obviously we agree on that being unforced, right?
Yeah. That one definitely surprised me because Sinner is so good at making a play there. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's the kind of return you expect him to make. He doesn't. Then at 30-40. Carlos ends up hitting a kind of a looper, high trajectory shot down the middle of the court to Sinner's forehand. He ended up looking at the court afterwards. I don't know whether he felt he got a bad bounce. Nobody seemed to ask Sinner. The most frustrating thing to me, Vansh, in modern day tennis, as a reporter who's been out there for over 50 years, is that in the old days, automatically somebody would have asked both these players to describe the 3 match points in detail from their end. From their perspective, what happened? Just analyze it. Sinner, nobody asked Sinner, and Carlos kind of got asked that question, but he didn't go into detail. But what Carlos did say was interesting, Vansh. He said, in essence, you heard the comment, but the gist of it was that he didn't feel there was nothing special about those match points. I think what he was trying to say was, I didn't hit great shots. I just tried to hang in there. And all credit to him. I frankly think that was the right way for him to play at that stage, because then he hit an ace and a winner to close out that game because he was more relaxed from deuce. But on the match points, I can't blame him. But I have to say, for Sinner, essentially he kind of gave away 2 of the 3. The first one he can't be blamed, but he shouldn't, I think it must make him feel a bit worse, Vansh. Don't you agree that as opposed to Carlos hit some of those, like, for instance, let me give you an example. One of those matches, one of the match points that Carlos had saved against Djokovic in Cincinnati in 2023, where Djokovic came in and hit a pretty good little angle drop volley cross court, and Carlos chased it down as only he could and passed him down the line. And Djokovic gave him a look like, you're just amazing. How did you possibly reach that ball? And it was a Carlos trademark winner. That's not what he was doing here. Obviously, he had no choice when Novak hits a volley like that. You've got to come up with something special and pass him. But what I'm saying is he knew that basically he was just hanging by something of a thread. And to Carlos's clear credit, he was not going to give it to him. There was no way was he going to double fault or make an unforced error. He was going to make Sinner come up with something. But I think it had to be disappointing for Sinner that he just didn't make more of those opportunities. He didn't stay in those points a little bit better. Either make the aggressive, make the back end return, give yourself enough margin to keep it in the court. And certainly that ball was a high forehand from behind the baseline, but one that he should keep in the court. And he didn't time it well. He hit it in the net. So, okay. Carlos with the two aces.
Don't you think the forehand that he had before in the rally, he had like sort of a mid-court forehand that he could really attack. I felt like he attacked it well. He hit it pretty hard and deep, but he didn't get enough width on it. So I feel like
the previous shot?
Yeah, the previous shot that forced Sinner to go back behind the baseline and hit it in the net,
Right. So what are you asking?
So I'm kind of thinking that Sinner should have hit it with a little bit more width.
Yes, I agree.
Beforehand, because it was hard, it was deep, but Carlos was there, ready, and he absorbed it.
Yeah, he could have. I agree with that. But the bottom line is he certainly shouldn't have missed that ball at the end of the rally. And I think he was stunned that he did it. And now just think, Vansh, what it must have been like for him to walk to that changeover. You should be feeling great because you're going to serve for the match. Instead, no matter what he says about deleting things from his mind, and I believe him that in general, he's very good at that. But you finish a set and you delete it and you go play the next set. But to go to the changeover at 5-4, knowing that you'd had triple match point, I really think it did carry over to the next game. He did not play a good game. It started with that errant forehand off a kind of a Carlos looper. Again, Carlos was smart. I give Carlos credit again for not always hitting, blistering shots, but loopers, high trajectory stuff that might make Sinner think a bit and might bother him more and get up above his shoulders. And it was one of those balls, but it wasn't terribly deep. And Sinner missed that. And
definitely unforced. But
definitely unforced. And the last one was unforced too on the break point. I just feel like that was, aside from the drop volley that he made after hitting the two overheads that got him to 15 all, he just was not. It wasn't confident that game, and Carlos sensed it. And Carlos came in at one point and knocked off the volley. I feel like Carlos could see that Sinner was apprehensive. Didn't you feel that?
that? I felt like Carlos played two really good points at that game, but Jannik probably made two unforced errors because there was that, and then there was also a down the line forehand that he went for.
The down the line forehand on break point was not good, and so he was definitely still shaking. Again, I was impressed that Sinner when he had to serve again at 5-6, played a decent game, gets himself to the breaker, wins the first 2 points, and you're thinking, well, maybe. And I knew, I'm sure you've seen enough of these matches too, Vansh, that you probably agree with me. But when somebody's serving at 2-love, that next point can be critical because there's such a huge difference between serving your way out to 3-love in that breaker or being back on serve and it's 2-1 and the other guys. And Carlos just caught him off guard with that cross-court forehand winner. I felt like Sinner normally might chase that ball, but he was not ready for it. He didn't see it coming. And I give, again, Carlos unleashed it, and it was maybe a little unexpected. All credit to Carlos. And then Carlos ended up serving a couple of aces, a couple of winners. The rest of the breaker, to me, from Carlos was just too good. Reminiscent in some ways to me of the final set breaker, where he just was unstoppable. But I felt like if Sinner had managed to win the third point, might have been different because he'd done a nice job to get the early mini break. And now here he is at 2 sets all. So to me, Vansh, sure, you were no more surprised than I was when Sinner got broken in the first game of the fifth because his spirit was a bit broken then. He hadn't given up by any means. But
he didn't make any first serves in that game. I think he went 0 for 6.
Yeah, it was a terrible game.
First serves. And so that really helped Carlos because by then, Carlos was pretty clear on what to do on the second serve return. I felt like earlier in the match, he was sometimes moving in, sometimes really far back. And he wasn't always timing it really well, but now
he mixed it up. You're right. He changed that a lot. I know McEnroe was puzzled that Carlos would start it off hugging that baseline more and returning really well those first 3 service games of Sinner's in the opening set. had then sort of gone way back, and it didn't seem to be paying dividends. And I mean,
I feared for Sinner when he got to that drop shot, then he kind of limped a little bit to his chair when he got broken at the start of the fifth.
Yeah, right.
That's when I was like, oh no, is this going to be another one of those Sinner matches where the fatigue and the physicality of the five setters, does that catch up to him? And luckily, to our credit, it wasn't.
Exactly. I think we all relieved it because it looked, you wouldn't have blamed him. I couldn't have blamed him because it was such a devastating blow to lose that fourth set, especially. But yeah, you're right. 0 for 6 to start this set. Now things got interesting from there because Sinner, Carlos holds, but then Sinner stays with him all the way up till he keeps holding 3 times. And he said, but you're still seeing him serve at 3-5. I thought he played a nice game at 3-5 to hold on there and make Carlos serve it out. And then, of course, he made that incredible get off the Carlos drop shot that got him to 15-40, which was astounding. And and he was rewarded for it because he could barely get his racket on it. So his shot, which was sort of an accidental drop shot, falls over the net and catches Carlos stunned. What could Carlos do?
I was a little surprised Carlos didn't follow that into the net, but I think he didn't expect Sinner to get there.
He didn't expect him to get there. No, he was sure. And then I think he thought when Sinner made contact, there's no way this ball's coming over the net. I'm sure whatever the reasons, it was really gutsy on Sinner's part. Then he breaks him on the next point. And now the match again, this was another dimension, Vansh, that Sinner breaks back. And then he had that tough game. He got it on his 4th game point. It looked like he had him maybe at 40-15. And Carlos kept coming back, and Sinner holds with the forehand down the line winner. So now he's won 3 games in a row. And once again, there was an agonizing point for him that I think might end up bothering him. And Carlos mentioned in the press conference, somebody asked him about it, but it was 15-30. It was 15-30, 5-6. So Carlos is 2 points from losing the match again, and Sinner's on the verge of perhaps running the match out on 4 straight games. He makes a decent return. Carlos hits the backhand down the line, but toward the middle of the court. It wasn't anywhere near the sideline to make Sinner straight. He played it, I think, wisely because you don't want to be too risky there. And Sinner, who's not really even on the dead run, takes a few steps and hits a cross-court forehand. And Vanch, I didn't think he was even going for that much, and it went way long.
Yeah.
And I think I'm sure that just
because he hit so many great returns in that game, and he did every other point. He played really, really well. That was the one unfortunate error that I think he's going to regret, along with the second set return on the first match. I mean, like those 2 points are like. Oh
yeah, and think about it, Vanch. He made that beautiful little finesse half volley that got him to 15-30. So
yeah,
and if he can stay in this rally and win it, he's at 15-40 double match point again. And then the double whammy of it was on the next point. He hit a great return into the corner.
Yeah.
And Carlos stabbed at the forehand. He just, as only he could probably with that slice forehand cross court. And when it left his racket, I remember thinking, this is not staying in the court.
Yeah.
And I think Sinner felt the same way. Sinner must have seen the ups, and he saw him open the racket face a bit and thought, and obviously that's the kind of ball, I've seen Carlos play that shot and hit it a couple of feet wide too. It's not an easy shot to make. It was the right shot to play under the circumstances because he wasn't going to be able to drive it. But amazingly, it went right in the corner. Again, it was a Carlos and only Carlos kind of shot.
That was like just Sinner, such improvisational genius to go to that forehand. And I don't know how it landed in. And only he could do that. It was just
only he could do it. And sure enough, Sinner couldn't get much on his forehand, and Carlos just steps in and drives the backhand into the open court for a winner. So that was a killer, that was a killer point because, again, if Sinner can win that point, he's at match point. And then even though Sinner hit a winning return to get back to deuce, Carlos holds on. Now, I must say, going into the final set breaker, I thought, well, they both should be feeling good because Sinner still made the comeback. He still saved himself from 3-5 down. Carlos should be feeling good because he could have been gone in the previous game. Those 2 critical points saved him. One error from Sinner, one brilliant winner from himself, and he ends up holding on from deuce. And I thought we'd end up with a really close tiebreak, but Carlos just maybe a little reminiscent of China last year when he was down 3-love in the tiebreak and never lost another point. And it was like one great shot after another. I wouldn't even mention one, but the next thing you know, he's at 7-love. And Sinner managed to salvage a couple of points, but that was all he could get. So that was a little disappointing from the standpoint of the fans, I guess. You would have liked to have seen a closer tiebreak, but it also was a demonstration of Carlos's greatness. And now here it was all coming down to one super tiebreak, and he was going to produce his best, and he did. And it's not like Sinner played badly. One or two errors that you might question, but basically it was just a phenomenal display from Carlos of taking matters into your own hands. And
I counted 2 unforced errors and 12 points from Sinner, which is hardly anything really. So,
sorry, Vansh, I couldn't hear that.
There were just 2 unforced errors and 12 points.
Yeah, right.
From Sinner, and like the first 7 points.
Yeah,
I felt it was over after that because.
Oh, it was because that was too big a climb. Once it got beyond 5-love, it's too much. Granted that tiebreak gives you time to come back, but not from that big a deficit. Carlos was not going to let him back in. But look, I mean, when you consider all those twists and turns that we just discussed, look at it from the perspective that Sinner's down a break in the first, but he wins it. He goes on that run of 9 out of 12 games. He's in command. He's up 5-2 in the second. Carlos makes a move, pushes him into a tiebreak. Then that topsy-turvy third set of Sinner having the early break, going down 4-1, breaking back, still not holding in the 10th game, and that's over. And then, of course, for Sinner to be winning 15 out of 16 points to get himself to triple match point, and then he's unable to get it done there. It had everything there. And then for us to get that kind of an unexpectedly great 5th set, I thought, because I would have thought that Carlos would have just closed it out 6-4 in the 5th. He had to save. He had a little struggle early in the set to hold his serve, but basically most of the holds were comfortable. And I thought he would close it because he just looked like the more confident player, and it just looked like Jannik was sort of hanging in there and still playing well, but not playing as well as he had earlier. And then Jannik found that magic to break back, and it gave us that one last dramatic sequence there from Carlos serving at 5-6 and being in trouble to Carlos rolling through the tiebreak. So to me, here's what I would say, Vansh. If you look at these great matches, let me start with Laver-Rosewall, which is on my list, by the way, which was a phenomenal match between 2 of the all-time greats playing in the WCT finals in Dallas, which at that time, because of the nature early in the Open era, the French and Australian fields not always being that strong in those days, Dallas was, in the players' minds, was a major because it was only the elite 8 guys who could get in, and they had to qualify based on what they'd done the whole circuit. And here are Laver and Rosewall, and they had met in the finals the year before too. And this one, up until late in the 4th, didn't look like it had the qualities of an all-time classic, because the first set went to Laver 6-4, and then Rosewall won the next 2 love and 3. It was 4-6, 6-love, 6-3, 6-7. Laver squeaking out a tiebreak, and then they go to the 5th, and that ended in a 5th set tiebreak, in which Laver led 5-3, and Rosewall won 4 points in a row at the end with some brilliant back-end returns. And everybody who saw it thought it was national television, 21 million people, 2 of the all-time greats. I still place that, in the top ranks. But my point is, the last 2 sets, both tiebreaks, that's what made it such a great match. And then you look at Borg-McEnroe. McEnroe winning the first set from Borg 6-1, and Borg comes back to win the next 2 5-3, and then the 4th set goes to the epic 18-16 tiebreak where McEnroe saved 5. He had saved 2 match points before the tiebreak, 5 more in the breaker, and then he wins the set on an 18-16 breaker and loses 8-6 in the 5th. So again, the last 2 sets were just gripping, compelling stuff. And then it's sort of the same with some of these other great matches. I mean, go to say 2019 Wimbledon, and that of course is one I'd have on my list, because it's again 2 of the all-time greats meeting in a Wimbledon final for the 3rd time, and it was almost like a 6-set match. And Djokovic is up 4-2 in the fifth. Federer serves for the match at 8-7, 40-15, double match point. Novak breaks. They eventually go to a tiebreak, but historic tiebreak because it was at 12 games all. So, but again, those last two sets are what, that last set especially in this case, it was really just the last set, but the last set was like two sets, and look what happened. And then you have, say, if you have a match like Rafa and Novak in Australia, and the same thing, it's 2-1 for Djokovic, fairly straightforward up until the end of the fourth, and Rafa squeezes out a breaker and goes up a break in the fifth, 4-2, 30-15, and Djokovic comes back. So I'm just saying, in almost every instance, and obviously the Wimbledon final of 2008, where Rafa's up 4-4, 2 tiebreaks to Federer, he saves a couple of match points in the 4-set tiebreak, and that goes to 9-7 in the fifth. So in almost every case, and this one fits into that pattern, Vansh, the latter stages of the match are where we saw the best tennis for a variety of reasons. It got, the standard improved in that at that stage of the match. And this one, these guys played for 5 hours and 29 minutes. I don't know how they found the energy, the stamina, and the guts to, because the points they were playing, I mean, I heard Sinner say in his press conference that they were both tired, but they didn't show it. No. Very little did they show it. They still were covering the court beautifully. They still were having really demanding baseline exchanges. They weren't the longest rallies we've ever seen, but they were taxing. And I felt like for them to play that well in the fourth and fifth, when, so basically we're seeing them do this in the fifth and sixth hour, those matches. We never got to 6 hours, but we got halfway there. And that to me made it all the more remarkable that, there was a lot of good tennis in those first couple of sets, some very good tennis in the third, but I thought the fourth and fifth were probably the best.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
So that's what you want to see, I think, in these all-time epics, is that it concludes in that way, that the best stuff is at the very end, and they each have chances, and they're each pushing each other to the hilt. And they certainly did that yesterday. Now, to me, Vansh, the question now, I mean, look, for Carlos, you look at Carlos and, okay, he's making a habit out of, his first Grand Slam final was a 4-setter against Casper Ruud. Okay, then it was hard fought, but it wasn't one of these. And then, that's back in 22. And, then we see him win that first Wimbledon over Novak in a dramatic 5-setter where he could have been down 2-0 and saves a set point in the second set tie break and manages to eventually fend Novak off in the fifth when Novak had an early break point opportunity. So that was dramatic, to beat Djokovic, who's won the title 7 times, and to do it in that fashion in a 5-set final. So now, he had that one. And obviously last year, then he wins in 5 over Zverev after beating Sinner in 5, back-to-back 5-setters to win the French, wins Wimbledon in straight sets over Novak, and now this 5-setter again. It's almost like he makes he's very willing to pay the price if he has to of going the distance, and he's 13-1 in 5-setters now. So we know how great he is under those circumstances. So I think for him, it was another validation of what he can do in crunch time, how he can produce his best when he has to. Even, and you wouldn't say it was one of his very best days. The early stages was a bit up and down, but when he had to produce later, he pulled out a lot of his very best stuff, much to the chagrin of Sinner, who was trying so ardently to get over the finish line. So from Carlos's end, it just reaffirms to him that he has what it takes. He's 5-0 in major finals now, and he just feels like the larger the stakes, the better his chances are to win. And that was another validation. For Sinner, it's the first time he's lost one of these. It's his first loss in 4 major finals. So, but it was a devastating way to go down, given what we talked about earlier, the mismatch point opportunities, the forehand miss at 15-30, 5-6 that might have given him 2 more match points. So for him, I'm fascinated to see. I mean, let me offer my thoughts, and then you tell me what you think. I feel like he'll get to Wimbledon. He'll do a good job of forgetting about it, in the sense of every other match he plays against anybody else, anybody else, even Novak, he'll still believe in himself, and he'll still feel like it. The question to me is, what happens if they meet again in the Wimbledon final? Can he turn it around so soon? I'm not sure about that. I feel, again, Carlos would, let's just say they met in the Wimbledon final. Carlos would be going for 3 in a row in the center court. Jannik trying to win his first. Jannik trying to still forget about losing his 5th match in a row to Carlos. And 4 of them, he won the first set, 4 of those matches. And 3rd set tiebreaker in China last year. So many matches, 2-1 at Roland Garros a year ago in the semis.
Yeah, he had the match point in 2022 at the U.S. Open where he served.
Match point in 2022, and Carlos goes on to take the title. But that one, I think, is a little more remote in his mind because at that stage he was still doing well against Carlos, because at one time he led 4 matches to 3, and now he's down 8-4. So I think, that win for Carlos was sort of evidence of what could happen when these guys play the closest kinds of contests. And he saved a match point in the 4th and won it from a breakdown in the 5th. But maybe Sinner at that stage in 22 is not expecting as much of himself. A lot's changed, and he wasn't winning majors yet, and Carlos was on his way to winning his first. But certainly the recent 5 have to weigh on his mind. And I would worry for him about, I don't think he would go out and get crushed by Carlos, but I think it would be a remarkable victory if he pulled it off so soon after this. My thought is, though, that as long as, let's just say hypothetically, he did lose to Carlos in the 4-set Wimbledon final, but then he started to play really well over the summer. I trust him more if they met again in New York and in the U.S. Open final. What are your thoughts? I think by then his head could be more cleared, and he's got a little more distance from it. Wimbledon is so soon that I think it's a difficult recovery that soon, just in terms of Carlos, not in terms of any other players or any other matches. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, you said it well in the sense that against every other player, he feels super comfortable and super reliable. Like in the last 50 matches, he's like 47-0 against everybody else and 0-3 against Carlos. So obviously the scar tissue of losing these really close matches is going to weigh on his mind. And with Wimbledon so soon, so soon after, he may just feel the effect of that in the really tight moments, I think, against Carlos. But also on the natural surfaces, like Carlos still has a little bit of an advantage that he can just pull off he can just produce this kind of magic down the stretch. Whereas on the hard courts, there's more opportunities for Sinner because, Carlos might get picked off by other players, but also if they do end up meeting, they haven't really met on a faster hard court yet. Like all of these meetings, I guess if you're a Sinner fan, you can look at it optimistically. If he got that close to beating him on clay at Roland Garros,
right.
And he did so many great things in this match. For instance, like his forehand cross court was just phenomenal. His running forehand, the way he took away Alcaraz's drop shot in the first 4 sets, like he made so many tactical adjustments, but he just couldn't win the last point. So that's the harrowing part about it.
Yeah, I think he actually has a better running forehand than Carlos in a lot of ways. And Carlos, once he gets time, once he's set up, there's nothing like that for him. But I think on the dead run, Sinner might be slightly better. And it's odd because I don't think he's as fast as Carlos, but he's really mastered that shot in the last couple of years. I used to feel like you could coax errors from Sinner. I remember when Djokovic beat him in the semis of Wimbledon a couple of years ago, that I thought he won some key points by going to forehand and drawing him wide. But I think now that doesn't happen.
I thought in Rome when they played, and also RG when they played last year, that tactic was more successful for Carlos than it was here.
Yeah, I agree. It was. But yeah, you're right. He did a lot of things really well. I mean, he played well enough to win really any of the sets. Obviously, he got the first 2. The 3rd, if he holds for 5-all, he can win. The 4th, he has the match points, and the 5th, he makes the comeback. So, in that sense, maybe that's reassuring in a way, knowing that he came that close. Maybe he could, with a little bit of luck, he could have gotten across the finish line. But I feel like somewhere soon he's got to make his move. I don't care where it is. I mean, even if he knocked him off in the finals of Cincinnati, Darren Cahill made reference to the Saudi Arabia match and said it didn't count in the record books, obviously, but they both were trying hard. And There's a lot of money on the line, and they were fighting. They were trying their hardest. I believe that, but still, both players also know that it's not. It isn't going to count. So that just changes things in some ways. It was a nice kind of a little bonus for Jannik to get that at the end of the year, but it's not the same as if he'd beaten him in China in the finals. Mm-hmm. So I feel like, maybe that can happen. Maybe somewhere over the summer, Canada or Cincinnati, something breaks for him there.
Yeah.
But obviously he doesn't want to see this streak, Vansh, go to 7, 8, 9 matches in a row. Mm-hmm. Now, I will say this. Carlos was very complimentary. I listened to his press conference. He was very complimentary and seemed very sincere when he said it. I can't go on beating him forever. He talked about the stages of the match where Jannik wouldn't miss. In his way, he was very complimentary about the kind of tennis that Sinner played and kind of admitting that at times he felt a bit vulnerable.
Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting. He didn't have to say it. I feel like he's pretty honest, mm-hmm. Carlos, about his feelings in the press conference. And I thought if that would get back to Sinner, if Sinner would hear about that again could help his state of mind a little bit. But look, I think you have to feel for him. You had to feel for either of these guys. If Alcaraz would have lost from 5-3 in the fifth, that would have been devastating to him after being triple match point down. For Sinner to have triple match point and then be 2 points away at 6-5 in the fifth, it's pretty devastating. But I guess I will say that given his disposition, his temperament, his outlook, how stoic he can be and how level-headed, I guess if anybody could deal with it well, it would be him. He will probably come as close as anybody. But in his press conference, you could tell when they asked him about how he felt going into the fifth set, you could tell he just didn't want to talk about it. I think he basically said it was kind of obvious. And, but again, that's only 20 minutes after the match or whatever it was. It was a short time after the match. And hopefully, in these weeks leading up to Wimbledon, to just get back to his training regimen and be thinking about just preparing for Wimbledon. And he does have the right kind of, he's a clear thinker that way. And I don't think he'll beat himself up. But on the other hand, it's cumulative because so many times to be on the verge of it. And then this one, the closest of all, the match points. It's like, and then he has to also be saying, how does Carlos do this time and again? I'm playing well enough to beat him, and he keeps taking these matches away from me, and he's not stealing them, he's earning them. So that's a hard reality too, don't you think? I mean, people use the phrase steal, he stole that set or he stole that match. But to me, Carlos, because of the way he handles the big moments, like we talked about the match points and not getting too fancy and keeping the ball in play, and he kind of helped it along for Sinner to self-destruct a bit by just no crazy errors, no double faults, no mistakes. He was going to make Sinner beat him. And then at other stages, obviously going like the final set tiebreak, just erupting and going for his shots confidently, knowing he can make them. So I think Sinner marvels at that because Sinner is more, he hits the ball a ton, but he's more percentage oriented. He's not trying to be as much of a shot maker. He's a bit more like Djokovic and, waiting for his openings and playing calculated percentage tennis. So for him, he knows that, that's a little scary when Carlos goes into that other realm and starts playing otherworldly tennis. You got to withstand the storm. But he did such a great job of that. He really did right up until the end. It's just he could not keep up with the tiebreak because Carlos just went on such a run, such a spectacular run. So I think all these things would be crossing his mind. I also think it helps him. Cahill's going to finish the year with him, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So Cahill will. I think Cahill is also a really level-headed, smart, cerebral guy. And I think, and he knows what, and I'm sure he didn't say too much to Sinner right after the match, but I'm sure he will talk to him plenty between now and Wimbledon and try to reassure him that that he can beat Carlos. And actually, it's nice for Sinner to hear that Carlos is basically saying that himself. And I don't think being phony when he says it.
Yeah, no, I think he really meant it because there were
Yeah,
stages in the match where he was looking up at his team like, I don't know what to do because
right,
there were so many
right.
times where like his first serve was getting, like center's depth and his relentless pace and just the
Yeah,
way he was covering the running forehand and just the way he was taking away Alcaraz's drop shots. Like a lot of the match, it felt like on center's racket,
yeah.
for some of it, and I wouldn't have necessarily thought that going in.
No, I
So,
agree. I agree, and
so
it was, and I guess Sinner just has to think to himself, look, it pretty much was on my racket, and I couldn't quite get it done. But if I play that well against him the next time, he's going to be hard pressed to do that to me again. You have to think positive that way. But look, the bottom line, Vanch, I was talking to some friends earlier. I mean, this match will do more for tennis than any match has in a long, long time because it's
yeah,
establishing this rivalry of these two guys. A lot of the general sports public was probably more familiar with Alcaraz up until now than they were with Sinner, despite the fact that Sinner was going for a third straight major. I still think they had seen more, heard more, and had this high regard for Carlos, and they'd seen Carlos's big matches with Novak, and they'd seen him winning majors going back to the 22 Open. With Sinner, it's more recent, but now the rivalry is foremost in their minds, and people can sense that this is the future now, and that whenever Novak decides to retire, whether it's this year or next, we're going to have these two guys around for a decade, and hopefully, playing a lot of major finals against each other, and it will take the place of the iconic trio of Federer and Nadal Djokovic. So and the fact that they played this such a spectacular, almost ineffable match, it almost was beyond words after a while. And I honestly think it was the kind of match that I got a call from a friend
yeah.
who I've known a long time. I go back with him probably to when I was 17 years old. So I've known him for about 55 years. And he is interested in tennis, but it weaves in and out. He doesn't necessarily watch every major final. He loved Nadal, but he sent me this text right afterwards saying he couldn't get over this match. He didn't pick it up until the fourth set, but he watched the entire fourth and fifth and how dazzled he was by it all. And I think he kind of spoke for a lot of general sports fans who might have turned in mid-match just to see what was happening and then found themselves captivated by both players. And so in that sense, I really believe that it will be an enormous boost for the sport heading into Wimbledon. A lot of people hoping they might meet again there, and knowing how likely it is that they're going to see these two guys out there time and again for a long time. This is not going to be Borg versus McEnroe in a fleeting 4-year series from 78 to 81. This is going to be much more like the rivalries between Djokovic and Nadal and Djokovic and Federer and Nadal. It's going to be a long running series, and hopefully there's going to be some fluctuations in terms of the outcomes, but that they're going to see tennis of the highest order. And I think, as I say, I think many of them now have a different view of Sinner than they had before, and they'll
Yeah.
be very excited about him as well as Carlos.
I think Sinner won a lot of fans because not only was he just such a great sport. I mean, they both are just such class acts. The way they, the sportsmanship. Like there were so many line calls that they just kind of, brushed aside the mark. They gave each other the benefit of the doubt. The way Sinner,
Yeah,
like after losing a heartbreaker like that in 5 hours and 30 minutes, the way he like just graced the podium and, just thanked everybody. Like, he kind of went out of his way to show what a classy guy he is. So I
no,
think,
he did, and
and then the
Carlos.
heart that he showed to come back in the fifth, and just how tough he made it
Yeah,
for Carlos the whole time, and just I think he's going to gain a lot of supporters. And the only thing that I was thinking about as I was watching this, obviously they have such different personalities. It's a bit like fire and ice. Borg and McEnroe. When you watch them
yeah.
play, like Carlos, he's just so much more. He shows a lot more emotion. He gets the crowd involved. He gets them all. And I've seen Sinner do it in some matches. I think back to like when Francis did it against him in Vienna at the end of 2021. And there was a period where Sinner was really starting to get the crowd involved. And he was, even though he is much more stoic and he's much more kind of, ice cool, doesn't really show a lot. But if you look at his face, you can't tell whether he's down 5-0 or, up 5.
Yeah.
He's just that kind of character. But like, if at times against Carlos, I wonder if you could use the energy of the crowd and actually like to his benefit, because in those moments before Alcaraz is about to play his peak tennis like he did in Beijing and the final set tiebreak there, I think that energy from the crowd, like that actually helps him get to that gear that Sinner can't quite reach yet.
Yeah, listen, I agree wholeheartedly with what you're saying. I would only say that Sinner, there were moments of fist pumping the other day that I liked, and I have a feeling that the people around him are going to encourage a bit more of that, because in a strange way, it's like you do yourself a disservice if you don't extend yourself to the crowd a bit more, because Carlos is doing it left and right, and I have no problem with that. I don't consider that gamesmanship. Carlos is enjoying himself, and he's just trying to say, trying to get them behind him, and all power to him. But if Jannik would do a bit more of that, he can bring more of the crowd round to his side. He might find he's bringing even better tennis out of himself. Now, to get back to your other point, Vansh, they each gave each other calls. They were very sporting that way. What I don't like is not having electronic lines, because
I totally agree.
You saw it yourself. Sometimes the umpires come down and check a mark and they're so sure, and then you see Hawkeye, and Hawkeye seems to be proving them wrong. Sometimes they're in accord, but I don't like the players having to worry about it. And one call Jannik tried to give to Carlos, and again Hawkeye made it seem like he was wrong. He thought the ball was in, it wasn't in, and I don't like seeing that. I feel like the players should just be able to play now. That the electronic lines have been a great thing for tennis, and I wish the French would not do that. And the notion that you don't need it on the clay, to me, it's just a mistaken. It's mistaken. It's not right. And so I hope in the years to come that, because I don't like the umpires having to get out of the chair a lot of times and check the mark, and then the silly discussions. The player points to a mark, the umpire points to another mark. Hawkeye says yes to the umpire. Hawkeye contradicts the umpire. It's not necessary, and I would rather that. But given the circumstances that they didn't have electronic, these guys were incredibly sporting and not wanting to harm the other, and not wanting to take any kind of erroneous calls in their favor. They weren't going to do it, and they both are great sportsmen in their own way. But I feel like Sinner will get more demonstrative. Surely the people around him will encourage him, and he doesn't have to do it left and right. But I remember, like, Paul Annacone would talk to Pete Sampras about doing a little more fist pumping at certain times, because it's just to your advantage. The crowd feels like you're talking to them. It's almost like you're having a conversation with them, and you're saying, "Hey, I need your support," And the fans, how can the fans not like that? They love it. And I feel like there were a lot of people in that crowd that respected Sinner that weren't necessarily rooting for him. There was a much larger segment cheering for Carlos, but you could win some of those people over and make your task a little easier. And I can't imagine that that's not a topic that Cahill and others will not address in the weeks to come.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess we should talk about the semifinal with Djokovic, because, coming into that match, with Novak winning Geneva and, not wasting that much energy in his first 5 rounds, and, how much of a tactical masterclass he put on against Zverev with all the drop shots. You saw that, we at least expected a close battle with him and Jannik, and we ended up getting 2 really tight sets 2 and 3. And, the first set, maybe not as much, but what did you kind of think of the match overall, and then also Djokovic's kind of salute at the end to the crowd, and the possibility that it will be his last time at Roland Garros?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was glad that he didn't come in and say in the press conference, "That's it. I know I'm never coming back here, and I don't even know if I'm going to go to Wimbledon." I'm glad it wasn't that, because he made it clear that he wasn't sure. Obviously, he wanted to I think so much of it, Vansh, was that he just appreciated how much passion they had and how supportive they were for him during that match. How much it meant a lot to him. So part of it was just thanking them too, and the other part was, sure, it's 12 months is a long way off, as he said, and maybe he doesn't play it again. Maybe he ends his career at the end of this season. But to get to the match, yeah, I know you and I we felt like he might have a shot in this match, and because he played really. he had a fairly straightforward draw. But Zverev was an obvious challenge, and Zverev knows what he's doing on clay, and Zverev was in the finals a year ago. And obviously it was disappointing for Novak that he couldn't complete the match against Sasha in Australia in the semi. So nothing personal, but he really wanted to win this. And, he got off to a little bit shaky start and lost his first service game. And then he never loses his serve again the rest of the match. And as you say, he employed the drop shot beautifully on a windy day. And that drop shot was always going to be more effective against Zverev than Sinner, because Sinner is a lot quicker. But still, it was the right play. And also some nice big hitting off his forehand. And I just thought he played 3 really good sets to finish that match off, and even dealt with his nerves in the last game with Zverev saving all his match points. And Novak still, every time the score would get to deuce, he just wouldn't allow Sasha to get the break point opportunity. And so he closed that match in a good way. So he didn't have to go through too much strain. It was just the right length match in a way. I guess 3:15, 3:20, whatever. Not long enough, but not too long. So I thought he'd be fresh for Sinner. And I think physically he was fairly fresh. But again, he got down in that first set, and he did well not to go 2 breaks down, and he kept it close enough and lost it 6-4. But as you said, the last 2 sets, then he breaks back at the end of the second set and played really well to get to 40-15 at 5-all. And I thought that was a crucial game, because if he can hold for 6-5 in that second set, maybe in worst case scenario, he's in a tie break, and maybe he wins the tie break, and suddenly, you're 1 set all, and you're excited. And didn't happen. Sinner broke him, served out. But then I was really impressed the way Djokovic settled into the third set, because it had to be kind of a not an easy image in his mind, Vansh, to be 2 sets down and knowing in the best case scenario you beat Sinner in 5, and you're probably out there for 4.5 hours, and your reward is a final with Alcaraz with not enough rest. But I think he just put those thoughts aside and just decided he was going to go as hard as he could in the third set. Almost broke for 3-1, got a bad bounce on a serve right off the line, but then suddenly there he was at 5-4 and 3 set points on the Sinner serve. And yeah, that's where you see, like at the end of the 5-all in the second set, and again at 5-4 in the third, he didn't quite have the old Djokovic, I've got this in my grasp attitude. He was excited and he was fist pumping, and he felt like it might go his way, but he played what I thought was a strange return on the 15-40 point on the first set point. He just a second serve return that he just tried to sort of moonball back. I didn't understand that. I thought he would be a bit more aggressive on that return. And then Sinner took control and hit the drive volley, and then Sinner hit a good service winner down the tee. And then on the third set point, Novak kind of went for broke on a forehand down the line and missed it wide. That was unfortunate. Who knows? He probably might have lost in 4 anyway, but it would have been nice to salvage the set. But he came off, I think, the important thing is I think he felt like, okay, it's not a typical straight set loss, that he played really quite well considering it was straight sets. And 2 very good sets, just didn't come away, wasn't rewarded for it. But that it will carry him into Wimbledon feeling pretty good about how he's playing. The combination of getting his 100 title in Geneva, winning, reaching the semis here, and feeling like obviously grass is better suited to him, especially at this stage of his career. Had he done anything less than that, had he lost to Zverev in the quarters, I don't think but no, he had the decent win over Zverev, good performance against Sinner. And now I think in the back of his mind, he said, I'm going to go all out for this Wimbledon. I can't know what's in store for me at the U.S. Open, but I've had all this success at Wimbledon, and I got my 7 titles. I was still in the finals the last 2 years. And so every year since 18, he's at least been in the finals. And I think he's got to be feeling pretty good about himself, don't you?
Yeah, I think there were a lot of positives he could take away from it. The only question is the rivalry with Sinner. If he felt like, he put in all that hard work, but he still couldn't get a set. And if he feels like, what does he have to do tactically against him if they play again, that kind of a thing. Because there was that streak of like 45 service games where he didn't get to break.
Yeah, right. Well, at least he got over. It's true. It's true. He got over that, and probably should have broken him more. He could have had that break at 5-4, and in the third and taken the set. He had a chance to break early in the set. He finally at least was getting into those service games. And he did get the one break. So, that got him back to 5-all in the second. But I feel like, yeah, that's a concern. The matchup is a concern, but I would feel like he's got to like his chances better on grass, that the conditions suit him better on the grass, that maybe, he's got a chance to end some points a bit sooner, and it's just not so much hard work. And he was playing in the wind and on clay, and even though it's not Sinner's best surface, the circumstances, maybe the conditions were slightly favoring Sinner. So, yeah, I mean, ideally he wouldn't have to play Jannik at Wimbledon. But I think he's going to be pretty enthused about going after that title. And that with a decent draw, again, he needs to conserve energy in those first 4 rounds, save it for the quarters on. But I think everybody has felt all along, Vansh, and I must say I have too, that if there was going to be one, I thought he'd be in the running in Paris, and he was, but that if there was one he was going to pull off this year, that perhaps could be his swan song. Wimbledon was always looking like the best chance. And who knows with Jannik? I mean, for instance, we don't know about Jack Draper. Jack Draper could be very tough for Novak, Carlos, or Jannik. And, I think, frankly, that would be the guy that Carlos would least like to play as he goes for his 3rd title in a row is Jack Draper, with a British crowd going wild, the left-handed serve, his game on grass. He'll be pretty tough to beat. So you're going to have, especially him, but a few other guys too. So you just don't know. I know the odds still favor that if Djokovic is in the semifinals, he's playing and the draw goes right, he's playing Jannik or he's playing Carlos and nobody else. But we'll see. Bottom line is he should feel like he made some real progress in those last 2 tournaments, and he got a lot of good matches in. Yeah. He had the 4 matches in Geneva. He has the 6 matches here. That was good to get 10 matches in a short span. And now, ideally, I think you and I were comparing notes. Ideally, he might play Queens or play something before Wimbledon. But if he doesn't, so be it. I still think he'd play his way into decent form or early in the tournament. He doesn't have to play a tournament. But so all told, I don't think he's got a lot to complain about. And he'll also know, Vansh, that the talk is going to be entirely about the other 2, especially after they played that final. There's going to be complete focus on Alcaraz and Sinner and which one of them is going to win it. And is Jannik ready to get his first crown in the center court? Is Carlos going to win his 3rd in a row? And there'll be some talk of Novak. You have to respect the 7-time champion, but it's not going to be the same as it was the last 2 years, where he was sort of seen as favorite or co-favorite. And maybe that helps.
Yeah, I'd still put him number 3 right behind those guys. Then I'd put Draper after him.
I agree. And then, you just see how it all unfolds. You never know what's going to happen. And, maybe he gets a break in terms of one of those guys. One of those guys gets upset and they're on his half and eases his path. You just never know. Yeah. But I feel like I admire the fact that he's taken his lumps. He gave Sinner his due, but he's not giving up. And if you look at the record, it's funny, Vansh. I was thinking about it the other day. He wins that last 24th major at the 23 U.S. Open over Medvedev. And then last year, he gets the semis of Australia and Sinner beats him. And yet he got to the quarters of the French and had to pull out. He's in the finals of Wimbledon. His only bad major was the U.S. Open, which was too soon after the Olympics when he lost to Popper. And then he goes back to Australia. He's in the semis again. He's back at the semis of the French. He's been really consistent. But obviously, you look at most of the losses, you look at in the last 2 years, Carlos at Wimbledon, Jannik in Australia last year, in Paris this year, mainly those guys didn't lose at the French last year. And really didn't lose to Zverev in Australia. He had to retire. So it still really comes down to those 2 guys, which is why he's worthy of the status you described as the 3rd favorite.
Yeah, absolutely. And, coming in, I mean, I guess since you mentioned Draper, coming in, what did you think about his Roland Garros run? Because he lost in the 4th round to Bublik, which was kind of very surprising. And we were expecting a showdown between him and Sinner.
I was.
And I kind of wonder, I know he's better suited to the grass, and he's going to be very dangerous there. He showed that last year at Queens, where he beat Alcaraz, and he won another grass court title leading in. But I hope the pressure and his status as the number 4 player in the world, in his mind and also in other people's minds, doesn't get the better of him when it comes to like handling the nerves, because it can be really tough carrying that mantle after, especially after Andy Murray is retired. I mean, so many people are going to be like almost expecting him to make the semis, and I think last year he didn't quite deal with that super well when he played another fellow Brit in the second round.
Yeah, it's my hope, Vanch, that he there is always the danger. You're being very realistic, and it's entirely possible that that's the scenario that plays out, which would be too bad. But I feel like he's kind of grown into this year. And despite the Bublik loss, I don't think it's that discouraging. Bublik is kind of he's a complicated guy to play. It's no fun to play him. And he was sort of on a roll. And how do you explain Bublik? De Minaur wins the first 2 sets 2-2 and loses the match. I mean, Bublik can drive guys crazy. And in a sense, he did that to Jack. But it's okay. I feel like it wasn't a disastrous tournament, 4th round. And I wanted to see him play. I wanted to see that matchup. We didn't get it. Excuse me. But yeah, I don't think it's a big setback. I feel like, okay, he still goes to 4 in the world. That's really nice for him in terms of the seedings that he knows. He'll go into Wimbledon almost surely now. He'd have to play Alcaraz or Sinner not before the semis. If things stay as that, most likely that's how it will be. So and then he can let the crowds work for him, Vansh. That's the other thing I would add, is that this flip side of the coin is, a lot of pressure on you, but the crowd's trying to boost you every step of the way and applauding your every good move. And there'll be noise for him like he's never experienced before. It'll be a bit like the Murray days. And I think he'll appreciate that. And hopefully that could bolster him a bit. And because you'd like to see him play one of those top guys. It would just be such an intriguing matchup right now on the grass with that serve. Just would be fascinating to see him play to see him play Novak, Jannik, or Carlos.
Yeah.
So I'm cautiously optimistic, Vanch, that he'll deal with the circumstances and deal with it well.
Yeah, let's hope so, because he's improved so much in the last 1 year, and the gains he's made, and he's so clearly like the next best player after those two from that generation, and he's shown that with Indian Wells and good clay court season. So it'll be fun to see how he carries on. But I want to switch over to the women, because I mean, Coco Gauff winning it on Saturday was also a remarkable story. And you mentioned Carlos and Jannik attracting new fans to the game. I feel like Coco does that too with her star power, and it was nice to see her win her second major, and the fashion that she was able to do it in those really tricky conditions, the way she dealt with everything, and how mentally strong she was, and how much she was able to get in Sabalenka's head. That was a real display of grit from her. To you look at the stats, 30 winners and 30 errors in those conditions is quite excellent.
It is, and obviously that unforced error category is tricky, and some people judge it differently than others. But I think it was fairly accurate count in this case for her, and because she was playing really very smart tennis overall. I love the fact that she used some slice forehands, but mainly then just looped it, rolled it, played it safe, kept it deep, allowed Sabalenka to self-destruct in those conditions. And I feel like the big thing was, first big thing, 4-1, 40 love first set, Sabalenka, and Coco manages to get into the breaker and lead 5-3 in the breaker, and Sabalenka strung together 4 dazzling points in a row to close out that breaker. And you would think that would have been back-breaking for Coco, but she got the immediate break in the first game of the second set. Sabalenka had a game point and couldn't win, wasn't able to hold on there, and then Coco really took over in the second set and went up that break in the third. And then I thought that was also impressive that once Sabalenka got it back on serve there in the middle of the third, you thought maybe 3-all, 4-all. It's like maybe she's going to turn this around. And Coco stayed very sturdy, and she just handled the conditions much better, I thought. I thought Sabalenka was very confused on how to proceed. What surprised me the most, Vanch, was Coco had it figured out, whether she was serving into the wind or with the wind, what she needed to do. And I felt like Sabalenka was befuddled from either end of the court, and sort of just her tactics were a little confused. Her execution was bad.
Yes.
And then, of course, we had the great last game, where Sabalenka hit the baseline with a return on match point. You still thought there was a chance she might break back, but Coco fended her off. And what I like about it is Coco's got that second major now. To me, players strive their whole careers to get on the board and win a Grand Slam title. But then once they've got one, they don't want to be a member of that one slam club. Yeah. It's uncomfortable in a way because people will say that it was a bit freakish or you were lucky or, you weren't worthy of more. Now she's got a second one so young. It's hard to imagine that she doesn't get a bunch more. And even if she doesn't, at the worst case scenario, she's a two-time major champion. And I think that will be very reassuring and satisfying, fulfilling for her. Not that she's going to rest on this and be satisfied, and she'll go after Wimbledon and the Open, but it was a big one for her to win. And this is where she made her first big final and lost to Iga so badly. And then she gets the Open. And what's also interesting is that both titles over Sabalenka both come from behind wins from a set down. And unfortunately, Sabalenka she was very ungracious in the way that she, both on the court and in the interview room afterwards, was very begrudging. And she said she thought that Iga might have, if Iga had beaten her, she would have beaten Coco. And these were kind of spiteful, surprising comments. I didn't blame Sabalenka and Vansh for being upset that the weather had to be that bad, because there's no doubt in my mind that the level of tennis would have been better from both in calmer conditions. But Coco was professional, and she went out and dealt with it, and she accepted it and realized there's nothing you can do about it. Let's use it to your advantage. And Sabalenka just, I think in her mind, just wouldn't stop complaining. She couldn't move past her negativity. And I thought that was unfortunate. And then the reaction at the microphone, okay, she's crying at first, I get that, but then immediately, oh, this was terrible, and I played so terrible. And then she sort of a backhanded compliment to Coco of being a great fighter, as opposed to you played really well and I congratulate you. And it didn't get much better in the press conference either. So I thought that was too bad. It tarnished it a bit from her end, not from Coco's. Coco was very classy, and Coco didn't. She was very, very, very level-headed and sensible. She didn't sort of get into a spiteful war of words and come back at Sabalenka. She said she wanted to play her, but she was very low-key about the whole thing. Yeah. And seemed to be very understanding about it. Even when Sabalenka was trying to compliment her on the court, she kind of nodded. She didn't seem to let that get under her skin, because she had garnered what she wanted, which was the title, and she knew she deserved it. And she knew it was Sabalenka's problem, that, Sabalenka, it's up to Sabalenka to get out on that court and solve the riddles and do what's required under those circumstances. And I thought she was surprisingly inept at times off the ground, and then obviously had difficulties serving as well. But I thought she would serve much better with the win than she did, Vansh. I guess that was the biggest surprise to me from Sabalenka's end. Well, I think that Coco was much more astute about what she needed to do with or against the win.
Yeah, I would say her performance on the court surprised me, and her negativity surprised me as well, because, I had been praising her all year for how good she has become at putting disappointment behind her, and she's very mentally tough as it is. She's gone through so much, and she's improved so much as a player. So I thought this was in the past. So this was a reversion to me of old Sabalenka. And I did not quite, I didn't expect that at this stage of her career, to be quite honest.
Yeah, I thought in some ways, Vansh, it could have even been a slightly worse, because I felt like in the earlier stages of her career, it was more about histrionics, about herself, about how she, tearful and upset and mad at herself. But I've never seen her be quite that ungracious toward an opponent as she was this time. So regardless, either way, it's reverting. It's true. It's a step backwards. And I hope we don't see it from her again, because she has many really fine qualities. And, she's improved so much, and she dealt with her service woes and all those double faults, and she fixed that. And she added the drop shot to her game. She's more complete. she's more enjoyable to watch. She's worked as much as she can on the athleticism and moving better. And there's a ton to admire about her. But on that particular day, there was not that was sort of tough to take. Anybody who's observed the sport and watched these major finals and seen how both finalists deal with each other and how they try to be generous and leave their, if they feel any bitterness or any angst, they save it for the locker room, they save it for their team, or they're in private moments. But out in public, they do better than that. So, and I thought she would do better than that. So that was the only unfortunate thing. But the bottom line is we got a 3-set final between the two players we thought might be in the final, or the top 2 seeds, and they both were worthy of it, both deserving of it. It went the distance. Sabalenka still broke back in the third, so that gave the match, that made the match more compelling than it looked like it would be, because it looked to me like it might, after that second set, it was possible that Sabalenka could go down 6-2 in the third. I felt like when she started falling apart at the Open a couple of years ago, it never, there was no real revival. She had a slight revival in the third set this time, but not enough to win. And that had a lot to do with Coco's poise and Coco's ball control in that swirling win.
Yeah.
Because the other thing, Vansh, is Coco, I thought, drove through the backhand well. I like that. I felt like she didn't have to compromise that much on the backhand. She could really still hit it pretty hard and control it well and not make the errors. Forehand, she was safe, and she had to be safe, and that was the right way to play. But she did some damage with the backhand.
Yeah, I thought the backhand was really sharp, and it put Sabalenka in a lot of defensive positions, and she hit it very cleanly and through the court, and it was a big weapon for her. For Sabalenka, I watch the way Swiatek plays in the wind, and I watch the way Gauff plays in the wind, and I just feel like they're more adept at it. Sabalenka, she has these like longer strokes. Sometimes the serve can go awry in the wind, and you didn't see that from her in the semifinal when the roof was closed, and she just felt so much more in her element in those conditions. It kind of helps her a little bit, and what's a little strange to me, I mean, what I think also is that I found unfortunate is she doesn't really rate Coco like that highly in her mind, and she's down in the head-to-head like 5-6, and it's happened to her twice at the U.S. Open, and the kind of thing here, and so that attitude, I feel like it's probably hurting her in terms of the actual matchup.
And it is, and I think Sabalenka going in, I feel like she had Madrid on her mind, and she felt good having beaten Coco that recently. And even if it was in altitude, it was still clay, and she played a very good match that day. But obviously, the circumstances are really different when you get out there in this kind of a win. And she probably was also agonized because
she beat Iga, right, and in the semis, and 6-0.
Yeah, because she beat Iga, right, but also that with some luck, it would have started to pour, and they would have had to put the roof up. They would have had no choice. That she was probably, and she knew she enjoyed it. And of course, that third set with Iga was a revelation to me. I mean, granted that Iga caved. I don't want to say caved. Iga got a bit down on herself at times, understandably, but Sabalenka wasn't making any mistakes at all. And 24 out of 30 points, and it was a nice way for her to go in the final, to finish a third set off like that against Iga. So it'll be interesting to see again. Sabalenka, what do we see from her at the U.S. Open? It's different, very different circumstances from Sinner and Alcaraz, because yes, she lost this one to Coco, but they keep going back and forth. So I don't think feels like Coco is just going to dominate her, but she knows that that it will come down to who's better on the day. That seems to be the case with these two. Yeah. And because the 6-5 rivalry speaks for itself, and but I would like to see them play again, and say in a semi or final at the Open. That would be fun.
Yeah, and I also give her a lot of chances at Wimbledon, because she has missed it 2 of the last 4 years, and I guess 5 if you also include 2020. And I feel like her game could work really well on the grass.
It should work. It should, and arguably the best first serve in women's tennis, and if she's serving well on that court, and that takes a load off her shoulders, and she can start swinging freely and going for her shots and hitting a lot of winners. And she should have a good chance at Wimbledon. I don't have any doubt about it. But I'm interested also to see if Coco can, if we finally see a really good Wimbledon out of Coco. I mean, so far she's been more comfortable, obviously, on clay and hard courts, but Coco will also come in flying high because she's got 2 more chances to add another major this year, but she's already got one, and she's got her second career major, and I think that's those are good circumstances for Gauff.
Yeah, and then also for Iga, she's gonna drop down to number 7 in the world. But I feel like her tournament it actually went a lot better than some people would have expected. In the sense, she got that win over Rabakina from a set and a breakdown, which was pretty big. She started to play much more confidently. The first 2 sets against Sabalenka were extremely good level wise.
Yeah, that's the thing, Clutch. It's like that's my only concern is that if only it could have been a 6-4 third set. Then I think she would have felt really good coming. I think she was a bit shell-shocked to lose the third. But on the other hand, yes, she knows how well she played in the first 2. And to split those, and she knows how important it was to beat Rybakina and then to follow it up with Svitolina. And so she had a decent tournament. It was not a disaster. She's got a chance to start rebuilding now. And that'll be interesting, too, to see if she can she's really going to want to. I think it's important for her to get a title somewhere along the line. It doesn't have to be a major, but win a title or 2 in the second half of the season and try to really regather herself to try to have a great 2026. But to start pushing that ranking back up again, try to get it back into the top 4 and play consistently well in all the tournaments. And if she can win a tournament or 2, that would be a big, big benefit.
Yeah. And obviously, the last really big story on the women's side was Louis Bosson making the semis and the wins she had over Pegula and Zhang Shenwen. And, this was somebody who was like number 150 a year ago, and then she tore her ACL. And, now she has that run to the semis, and she's going to be inside the top 70. And I think she can climb much harder because, her game reminds me a lot of like Sam Stosur, and she's got that really heavy forehand, a lot of really good variety on the backhand. Like, she caused a lot of issues to Pegula down the stretch and also Andreeva, and she just dealt with the occasion really well. So I'm excited to see what she can do.
Yeah, I'm excited about her too, Vansh. And I also agree with you I'm in complete accord about the upside and where she may be headed. I don't see why she stays injury-free, that we wouldn't see her in the range of, and it won't happen overnight, but toward the end of the year and pushing her way towards, say, 20 in the world. Where she goes from there, I don't know, but I'm convinced she can get into that kind of territory. This didn't look accidental to me. I mean, I know that it couldn't have hurt her to have these euphoric French crowds cheering for her in every match and using that as an energy supply and to inspire her. But there's so many things she does well, and you kind of don't know what's coming. The time she lulls you into things, and then she starts really ripping the forehands. And I think her backhand could improve, but I feel like she's got a lot of all around ability, and she's tricky to play. And she proved that those were 2 really good wins. And Pegula and Andreeva had their opportunities, and Jess won the first set and 4-3 in the second. I thought she would win. And Andreeva had her set points in the first set and 3-love in the second, and she couldn't stop her. And they're both pretty experienced right now. And so I just feel like I'm encouraged about where she's going, and she's an exciting player to watch. So I hope there's no more injuries and that she plays a pretty full schedule through the end of the year. And then I think that ranking will inevitably climb.
Yeah. And just overall, I felt like it was such a great tournament, and, we got all the matchups we wanted at the very end, from semifinals onwards, and, like 14 of the 16 like quarterfinalists that we all pretty much expected would get there, all got there. So, from a second week perspective, you really couldn't ask for much more.
Yeah, listen, it's funny you bring that up because I feel that I agree with you, and you have so many fans who sometimes are pulling for upsets, and it might be exciting on the day, but then ends up depriving us of really good matchups later. That sometimes can be a negative for a tournament long term, what happens on a given day with shocking upsets. So I was happy too that we got most of the expected matchups, and that made for a much better second week and a far better conclusion to the tournament. And then obviously to end it with an all-time, with one of the all-time great matches, certainly of the last 50, 60 years, that was ideal. And I noticed that Federer sent out I noticed that he put something out on social media about, that there were 3 big winners today, Carlos Alcaraz, Jannik Sinner, and this beautiful sport. And he was right. It was right, because it's only going to ignite interest. It's only going to inspire a lot of sports fans to pay attention to Wimbledon even more than they normally would. And I think that's all good.
Absolutely. And if they're able to produce this, like the US Open on their 4th meeting, and this was their 12th meeting, and we presume they're going to play many more times, wonder what the 20th, 30th meeting would look like this.
Yeah. Well, I am too. And I just want to see Sinner be able to hold his own. I'm not saying that he'll come back from an 8-4 deficit and eventually win the career series, but I want him to win his share, and I want to see them keep pushing each other. And in a strange way, I feel like Carlos expects that. Carlos expects that will happen, that he'll then have to go back to the drawing board, and they'll keep trying to come up with new ways to feed each other. But boy, if we can just get that type of quality, and have another, the next couple of times they play at the majors, more 5-setters either way, I'm not going to argue with it. And I think they both look. The other thing is, to get back to what we said earlier, they both represent the game so well in their own ways.
Mm-hmm.
And that's also something that I think the public is going to appreciate.
Yeah, absolutely. So more of the new too. And hopefully we get another Wimbledon final between them. We get more of these classic matchups. Hopefully Djokovic is in there. We see another great Wimbledon, and it's coming up soon.
It is. I mean, look, there's some good scenarios could play out. Djokovic could get number 25 at Wimbledon. That would be fantastic. And if it wasn't that, and it's another Sinner Alcaraz final, how can we go wrong? I would say this. I think the odds are pretty good that with the 2 remaining Grand Slam finals, at least one is Sinner versus Alcaraz. I'm not going to say both, but I think one of the 2. And if we get that, that's terrific. It's particularly if it's another high caliber match, and that'll take us into 2026. But I feel like the level of reliability they both have. They're both so professional. They don't let their guard down much. We know that Carlos has had a few shockers, yes, but right now I don't know. I don't know if we're going to see a repeat of the 2024 U.S. Open again in 2025. I can't see another loss like that. And I feel and Sinner just simply does not let his guard down. I mean, I'd be more shocked to see him lose early than Carlos anywhere at these majors. And so I think, maybe we're heading into a fascinating new stretch for the game, where this rivalry is sort of front and center. And too often in the past, obviously, we know the Open match was a quarter when Carlos saved the match point, and they played 4th round of Wimbledon, I believe, in that year. And now the semis of Roland Garros last year, and finally in the final now, and they're likely to stay 1 and 2 for quite some time. So now we'll be treated to, whenever they meet, we'll be treated to them playing, vying for the title. And that's, of course, what made this one so special, is that Sinner, I mean, they both realize when it's over. I mean, they weren't playing just to beat each other. The French Open is on the line. This is the final. This is history. And obviously, Carlos moved ahead in the race 5-3, and those Sinner could have tied him. And so there's going to be so much at stake every time they meet. And for the foreseeable future, probably for at least a couple of years, they're going to occupy those 1 and 2 spots.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't wait to see many more Slam finals between them, more big matches, Masters 1000 matches. I think we're going to get a good fair share more this year, and we'll see if Sinner can win his share as well. It'll be interesting to
see if Sinner. Sorry, I didn't hear that last part.
To see if Sinner can win his fair share as well, and he can finally get a win, and we'll see.
Look, we saw in other rivalries, Vansh, there's stages in Novak dominating Rafa, and Rafa would come back and start beating him again, and that's why that ended up 31-29. And early on, Roger was dominating Novak for the most part, and Novak came back there. But I'm saying both those rivalries, there there were periods of, where of domination, but it didn't stay that way. It didn't stay that way permanently. And even late in his career, Roger was able, I guess late in 19 at the year-end championship, so Roger was able to get a round-robin win over Novak as in the year-end championships, that kind of thing. And we need that. We need Sinner, and we need Sinner definitely to win his share. And look, we saw it in Borg McEnroe. It had turned, but what we'll never know, Vansh, is it was 7-4, I believe. Yeah, it was 7-4 for Bjorn, and then John beat him 3 times in 1981, including the Wimbledon US Open finals. And Bjorn, in his mind, thought he couldn't beat John anymore. And that was part of the reason he left the game, which was too bad, because the way that McEnroe was playing in 82, I think there's a good chance that had Borg stayed in the game, that he would have had some wins over McEnroe. So that's always ideal when you just can't anticipate what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And Sinner, to me, is too good a player not to start winning his share. That's still my view, despite what happened here. I just think we'll get back to my comment at the beginning. I wouldn't expect it at Wimbledon. I'd expect a better chance that Sinner is peaking at the US Open.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, with that, Steve, we always peak whenever we do these Grand Slam discussions after the fortnight. So it's I'm going to be glad to do it again, and love hearing your insight as always.
I enjoyed it, Vansh. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, pleasure as always. Thank you.